Hey, everybody. Welcome to I'm so sorry. A listener recently told me that I say, hey, everybody, too much. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a bonus episode of CNA Newsroom, the podcast that brings you great Catholic conversation each week. I am your host and CNA's editor-in-chief, J.D. Flynn, and I'm joined today by CNA's DC editor, Edward Condon. Edward, thank you for being on the program.
Hey, guys.
Oh. Hey, everybody. Welcome to CNA Newsroom. Ed and I are recording this episode of CNA Newsroom on June 20th, 2019, which is the one-year anniversary of revelations about allegations of sexual misconduct of a minor on the part of then Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. Ed, what a year it has been.
It has been really the annus horribilis for the church in the United States, and really it's been a pretty grim year and a half for the church more broadly. We think of the sort of the year that was never-ending Episcopal scandal beginning with today, June 20th, and the McCarrick allegation surfacing. But really, when you consider that 2018 kicked off with the Pope's trip to Chile and how unbelievably bad of a dumpster fire that turned out to be, it's been a long road.
For those of you who don't remember, the Pope's trip to Chile, which happened at the beginning of 2018, turned into really quite a something because the Pope was traveling through Latin America, and he was confronted about the appointment of a bishop, Bishop Juan Barros, who was alleged to have been complicit in acts of clerical sexual abuse on the part of his sort of mentor, a priest named Father something Caradima, who turned out to be, I don't remember his first name, but who turned out to be notoriously sexually abusive towards young men. And Barros, who had been appointed a bishop in Chile, was alleged at that time to have been complicit in Caradima's activity, or at least to have known about it. And the Pope had sort of pushed that back for a while and said, well, this is just kind of a political accusation. This is at one point he said that Chilean Catholics were being led by the nose by the leftists. In other words, that they were being sort of just used. And then while he was in Chile, it became manifestly clear that, in fact, one of the victims of Caradima had reported to the Pope years previously that Barros had been present while he was being abused, and that the Pope had received a letter to this effect.
Well, we've taken. I didn't mean for this to be quite the detour it's turned into already, but the circumstances around that letter and how it was delivered to the Pope or not are still unclear, as is almost everything that touches Episcopal misconduct in the Church. It was shown and proven that this letter from one of the victims had been given into the hand of Cardinal O'Malley, head of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. Cardinal O'Malley made it clear that he had delivered the letter, although it was not clear whether he had delivered it into the Pope's own hand or delivered it to sort of the papal office or whether the Pope read it himself or reacted and had forgotten or what. We don't know. Anyway, what ended up happening, though, was by the end of the Pope's trip to Chile, he had ended up issuing a pretty round apology to the victims at the public instigation of Cardinal O'Malley, which was shocking in itself at the time. And the situation in Chile continued to unravel at a rate of knots until the entire hierarchy of the country tendered their resignations. And I've sort of stopped my Chilean bishop clock, but I stopped it at something like 15, I think, had their resignations accepted.
And then they were replaced, and even that process has not gone perfectly. But, at the time of Cardinal O'Malley's kind of chastisement of the Pope for some of the comments he made about this allegation, I wrote how unusual it was for a cardinal to be at odds with the Pope or not to publicly defend the Pope. And now, 18 months later, it has just been a very strange 18 months for the Church, in which there have been these revelations about clerical sexual abuse and cover-up, and
And particularly Episcopal.
That's right. Especially Episcopal sexual abuse and cover-up and sexual coercion of seminarians, which has been manifest not only with McCarrick but with other bishops in the United States and abroad. A bishop in India is on trial for the rape of a nun. It has been that nun has claimed that she's being persecuted by the other bishops of India. It has been an extremely dispiriting year, and on top of all of that, so much of those stories have been politicized. Something I would not have expected a year ago, but that I've been thinking about lately, is that when the McCarrick scandal broke, initially it really was surprising, but it was edifying too that Catholics of various ideological and cultural perspectives were united in their outrage, their anger, and their desire for accountability and for change. And over the course of the year, I guess it shouldn't come as a surprise, but it did, over the course of the year, even that scandal and the scandals surrounding it have become politicized and have become, again, the sort of things that over really very little in terms of actual disagreement, perception more often than reality, have probably calcified Catholics in their tribes and in their sort of partisan back and forth that I think is often an impediment to really resolving this issue and to resolving so many other issues.
I think it's fair to say that in the church, well, anywhere really, but especially in the church, politics and power is definitely the enemy of faith, and without faith, things quite literally go to hell very quickly.
Yeah, I was trying to think of some sort of old school '90s rap politics and power song, but I didn't have one.
I can think of a few, but I don't know that you'd let me broadcast them on.
I would not let you broadcast them. One thing that we reported about today that's worth talking about is that McCarrick, Theodore McCarrick, who was laicized and is obviously no longer a cardinal, he's no longer even a cleric, is living in a monastery where he has been living for most of this last year, in a friary, a Franciscan friary, a Capuchin friary in Kansas, in Victoria, Kansas. After he was laicized, we reported that he would be planning to move out of the friary where the Archdiocese of Washington had been paying for his room and board. And the friar said that he would be planning to move out, and the bishop of the Diocese of Salina, Kansas, said that. But as we reported this morning, he's still living there. And that has people have taken and interpreted that in different ways.
They certainly have. I think a lot of people have expressed a certain amount of confusion and anger about why Mr. McCarrick is now essentially living off of the charity of a mendicant order when he is, by all accounts, not incapable of either paying his own way in the world or finding somewhere else to live. There's the question of, what good does this serve for the community that's hosting him? I mean, obviously this is a decision of the superior, and it's his decision to make, but there are questions about whether, what about the poor friars who are there? Do they really deserve to have McCarrick in their midst for the rest of his life? And also there are questions about, why should the church, the church has effectively cut McCarrick off from the discipline and structures of the church, not from the community of the faithful. He's not been excommunicated, which we won't go down the why excommunication is not the appropriate penalty for
Over
this.
the course of this year, Ed and I have also had a canonical fight, which you probably have been privileged to listen to, about who can and can't be excommunicated and under what circumstances. And Ed wrote his doctoral dissertation on certain circumstances of excommunication, and so he's credentialing me all the time with that.
No, I'm not. I was actually referring to the part that you and I are usually in lockstep about, which is that excommunication is not an appropriate. People don't know that people don't treat it as medicinal; they treat it as punitive,
exactly.
And it's not.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
This is not an expiatory penalty, so McCarrick is not excommunicated.
Right.
That's not the point of excommunication. It's to effect their reform. And if he's living a life of prayer and penance as a laicized priest and bishop in a monastery, he's clearly, demonstrating some level of obedience, one would think.
And he's not holding himself out. Usually excommunication is used for someone who is holding themselves out in a situation of perduring contumacy. So they have made a statement of, a heretical statement. They have asserted heretical beliefs and continue to maintain them. They've not recanted them, or they are otherwise continuing in, perduring in some situation that puts them at odds with the church. And there's a difference between that and a profound, or even a series of profound moral offenses and criminal offenses for which there can and ought to be, in this case was a penalty. But I don't think McCarrick is, there's a difference between concubinage or heresy and what McCarrick has done, I think, from a legal perspective. Although concubinage is not an excommunicable offense. It's just, I can't remember, but it's just the kind of thing that perdures was my point.
We're going to be cutting a lot of this out.
We are. Why?
Because we're getting down so many rabbit holes. So
I think the
quickly.
people like the rabbit holes. I think they do.
One of the things that this news that McCarrick is still living in the Kansas Friary, a question it raised for me is this, which is why? And I don't mean that as sort of, how dare they, how dare he, but I'm sincerely surprised by this. A lot of the work we did over the last year has bent towards establishing that McCarrick is by no means short of funds. I remember I talked to somebody in Rome at the Congregation for Bishops shortly before the decision was published, laicizing him, and said, well, what do you think is going to happen to him? And they said, oh, well, he'll spend a bit of time in the friary, and then he will go and stay with family or stay near family, who I think most of his family now live in Florida. And I said, would they have him? The response I got was, oh, they have millions of reasons to take McCarrick in. So there's no, he's not indigent. He wouldn't otherwise be living under a bridge. So it really puts in front of me the possibility, at least, that maybe McCarrick has asked to stay there. Maybe he is actually trying to live a life of penance and atonement for what he's been found guilty of. Of course, the immediate follow-on question to that is, if that's what he's doing, the best way he can make amends is to, make some sort of formal acknowledgement of his crimes, which he's
right, and a
done.
manifestation of what has happened. We really don't know. We really don't know. What we do know, the friars answered some questions for us, but they didn't go into depth, which is understandable. But what they did tell us is that McCarrick had offered to pay for his room and board out of his own pocket, and the friars declined that, which tells us that two things: one, that he wants to be there, and that he is their guest. And so then I think we have to ask ourselves, why would the Capuchins have McCarrick as their guest? And there are a lot of possible conjectures for that. And I know that people have made conjectures about, like, they're being pressured by the bishops, or this is part of a cover-up or something like that. But I prefer to speculate, and it's purely speculation. I prefer to speculate that there's something profoundly Capuchin about taking in as a guest this man who is disgraced by his own deeds, who is, by his own fault, been taken from a position of great worldly power and influence to becoming a global pariah by taking him in and inviting him to table and to prayer. Whether he's ready for the kind of conversion we would hope for, which would lead to a public manifestation of conscience, or not, it seems to me there's something, and again, this is my own conjecture, but it seems to me that at least possibly there's something deeply Franciscan about their even being willing, the Capuchins even themselves being willing to sort of be scorned by those who say, oh, well, they're taking him in just to protect him, or more clerical culture, even for them to accept sort of those slings and arrows to be in solidarity. I mean, I don't think they're not condemning him. I don't think they're condoning him, but to have a kind of, to allow him to be their lost sheep, I think is actually, it's possible, and probably we won't know while McCarrick is alive. Maybe we won't ever know, but I think it's possible there's something profoundly Christian about what's happening here.
I absolutely have no questions for or criticisms of the Franciscans for taking him in. I think it's an act of almost heroic virtue on the part of the community. And yeah.
And again, that's our conjecture. We could find out next week that it's something really bad.
It could. I don't know. But at least on the available evidence, I would say I have no reason to criticize them, and I have no criticisms to offer. Although, playing devil's advocate, having said maybe the reason Theodore McCarrick wants to stay there is because he is sincerely trying to live a life of atonement for what he's done, there is the other alternative, which, in fairness, we have to speak plainly, which is this is a guy who's in his late 80s, has really not gone a day in his life, certainly in recent decades, where he hasn't had the support structure of an ecclesiastical community around him taking care of him and everything else. And it is just possible that he would rather live in the Kansas Friary in familiar, understandable circumstances where he is cared for and provided for, even if presuming upon an act of heroic charity by those hosting him, than he would trying to find somewhere else to be.
And I think it's possible that if he has the kind of money that we have been led to believe that he has, that we suspect that he has, that we've been trying to investigate that he has, it's certainly possible probably that he could pay for comfortable senior accommodations, beyond comfortable senior accommodations even, But I think you're right. I think probably there's something extremely familiar. I was thinking about Brooks in Shawshank Redemption. Old Brooksy got out and he couldn't hack it because he was so institutionalized, and so as you remember, he ended up taking his own life. And I was just sort of, which is not what I'm saying about McCarrick. I have no idea.
Got dark here, JD.
But at the same time, it's entirely possible that a person who has been through what he has been through in the last year, and deservedly so, I'm not in any way defending him, but it's not unreasonable to think that such a person might be in a very profound both spiritual and mental health crisis. So it may be that he's institutionalized and he just likes being around church setting. It may have been just the easiest way to be in a comfortable, taken care of place. And it may be something far more significant. And I just don't think we will know.
No, we probably won't. And there's a lot about Theodore McCarrick that we still don't know and probably will never know. As we've talked about on previous podcasts and in a lot of the coverage we've had, even in recent weeks, including last week in Baltimore, we know that there is an ongoing Vatican investigation, for whatever that is worth, into how McCarrick was able to rise through the clerical ranks and remain in such a lofty position for so long under 3 different popes. That this is being compiled by the Secretary of State in Rome, that at least the Archdiocese of Washington has already completed its own review and sent their findings to Rome for inclusion in that report. And they will release something. I don't think there's any doubt about that. They wouldn't keep talking about it if they didn't intend to release something. But I think there's going to be a serious moment of a serious test of credibility over this when that document comes out. And at least from what we've been able to put together in our own coverage about how McCarrick moved around and was able to get his hands on significant amounts of money, use it pretty much as he liked without any kind of oversight, but records still existing of all of this. I will be very interested to see if any of that is addressed. One of the great scandals, I think, of the Bishop Michael Bransfield situation, which erupted shortly before the Bishops' Conference meeting in Baltimore, was the submission by Archbishop Laurie of the findings of this investigation into him and his decision to basically redact the names of the bishops who had received money from him. And his eventual apology and explanation was that he thought this would be a distraction. And I suspect there's going to be a lot of distracting stuff in the McCarrick files. I would say that there's a lot to distract you in there, and I suspect whatever comes out into the public domain eventually will be very light on distractions, and I think that's the problem.
That's exactly the real problem,
because there will be no restitution of credibility for the hierarchy in this country and in Rome until
if it's whitewashed. Yeah.
Well, exactly. So to give you an idea of whitewashing of history, it's been shown.
Well, hold on, you're
Twitter
transitioning so fast.
I'm still talking about McCarrick, man.
We have Ed and I have our little outline, and Ed's transitioning to the next thing already. But I still have things to say about that thing.
No,
okay, go ahead,
going.
and then we'll circle back. No, we'll circle back, man.
No, I was just saying on the subject of whitewashing and
talk about whitewashing, Ed.
Talk about whitewashing. The Cathedral of St. Matthew's in Washington, D.C. Has removed the coat of arms of Theodore McCarrick from the place in the wall where it was formerly displayed in the stone of the wall.
With like all the bishops, all
the archbishops of Washington's coats of arms have been displayed, and there's now a gap between Cardinal Hickey and Cardinal Wuerl's coats of arms,
right,
where McCarrick's used to be. And a lot of people were saying, oh, this is good. People were taking pictures of it and posting them on Twitter and saying it's good that the church is finally sort of exorcising McCarrick from the cathedral and from the local church, which he disgraced. I got to be honest with you, I don't like it. I think that, like it or lump it, McCarrick was the Archbishop of Washington.
Right.
It's a reality. Yeah. And there are ways of, and I think this typifies really what the hierarchy in this country would like, and probably in Rome too, which is for McCarrick to be gone and forgotten. And the truth is he's neither yet, and he won't be until we have some sort of real reckoning for it.
And he was the Archbishop of Washington. And, the problem is in Everything is Fine here, taking his plaque off, and we're in this huge period of whitewashing history as a culture where where we're taking down things that offend us. And the thing about statues in the South is extremely complicated. I don't want to get into that. But even, it's
shaking my head vigorously. I do not want to get into that.
But even Notre Dame, covering up the Columbus-related murals. We're in this.
I'll go to town on that one if you want to talk about that.
Well, my point is, we're in this sort of cultural period where we're pulling from the records of reality, things that might be triggers for people. And I'm sensitive to people who are upset when they see that McCarrick's name is in the cathedral, because but I also think that's the properly ordered response to remembering that McCarrick was the Archbishop of Washington. And when we whitewash that reality from the church, we do two things. One, we sort of, it looks like the church's leaders are saying, oh, nothing to see here, everything's fine. Like it's sort of the Disneyfication of the complex and often evil realities of human existence. And we lose the reminder. I want to remember. I want every Archbishop of Washington from now until the suppression of the See of Washington and some future date when the American Empire has been conquered by someone else. I want every Archbishop of Washington to remember Theodore McCarrick. And I want everybody else who goes to St. Matthew's Cathedral to remember Theodore McCarrick too, because he is a reminder of the pervasive power of evil. And he's a reminder of the importance of us praying against and working against that evil. So that kind of whitewashing is...
So two examples I'd give of other ways we could commemorate the reality of Theodore McCarrick's tenure in Washington. In Westminster Cathedral in London, there is on one of the walls a panel giving the names and dates of the Archbishops of Canterbury when they were in communion with Rome, and then following the restoration of the hierarchy, the Archbishops of Westminster. And when you get to Archbishop Cranmer, who famously defected from the faith, it still lists him as a legitimate Archbishop of Canterbury, but then it has, in parentheses after his name, deprived for heresy. Mm-hmm. And, it recognizes this happened. This is where we were. Right. Are you familiar with the Galero tradition for cardinal archbishops in their cathedral?
I'm familiar with the Galero tradition, but I don't know that others are. So a Galero is a hat. It's like a cowboy hat for cardinals, and it has tassels. And the hat, the Galero of a cardinal, is hung in the ceiling of his cathedral.
And the tradition around it is that it's hung to remind his former archdiocese to pray for him, and that when eventually the cord that it's hung by rots through and the Galero falls, this is a sign that he's finally made it out of purgatory and gone to heaven.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, so this is an old pious tradition, and I've heard a couple of people around Washington, all of them priests of the archdiocese, suggest that McCarrick should have a Galero hung, probably with a chain instead of a cord, though. And that way... as you say, to serve as a reminder to the people of the archdiocese, but also to all the subsequent archbishops that this is a part of your history that must be recognized and must be recommended with.
And not only, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, speaking of reminders, I mean, including the current Archbishop of Washington, Archbishop Wilton Gregory.
Yeah. Are you going to transition again?
No, you told me to just talk about McCarrick. That's all I'm doing.
I know. Okay, I thought you were moving on to another thing, which was something about Gregory. I would just want to come back to that thing for 1 second, because it's not only like a reminder that this is a part of our history, but I think a reminder. One thing that has happened with McCarrick, I think one reason perhaps that one thread between McCarrick in the cathedral and McCarrick in the friary is our desire to make McCarrick other, to make him the other, to make him
a non-person.
Or evil in some way that we could not be. But evil, if it's true that the line between good and evil runs through each and every human heart, then McCarrick became McCarrick over a series of bad choices, his and others. There's some intimation that McCarrick himself may have been a victim of some very serious and problematic things, and if that's true, then McCarrick became McCarrick over a series of bad choices, sinful choices. And so not sort of like remember that there might be wolves around you, but remember that the evil one is waiting to turn you into a wolf and then to destroy you, and to guard ourselves against evil, to remember that, there's a reason why there's a correlation between, there's a reason for us to remember why there's a correlation between pornography and sexual violence and sexual assault, because most people, many people at least, are able to justify opening up their web browser and looking at pornography and never considering the significance of the way in which evil nestles itself into our heart and then chokes everything else out. So we should remember McCarrick not just to remember that there was a bad man, but to remember that we ourselves could fall subject to an escalating and absolutely impossible to even envision for ourselves, but an escalating series of temptations, lest we guard against it.
All of that. But also just from the there's an objective empirical reality, which is we are owed an explanation. Everything that is done in the
Yes,
darkness
yep.
must be brought into the light.
Yeah.
The people of God are owed a reckoning over
And in
this.
that sense, that's the way I want Gregory to see it. I want Gregory to see that plaque and say, "Oh, I haven't put out that report yet."
Yeah.
Every single day. We were talking before about the kind of the Lori taking the names out and him saying it would be a distraction. Cardinal Tobin at the USCCB meeting. I don't know if you were at this press conference, but I asked him a question.
I asked him a question too.
Yes, we did. We both asked him questions, and the question that I asked him was about whether or not he would be releasing information from the Archdiocese of Newark about McCarrick, what they had in their own files, and he said that they couldn't right now because of their Attorney General's investigation, and that, or the veracity of that, and the significance of that is something that we at CNA are actually looking into right now. But what's relevant, I think, for right now is that he told us also that the Holy See's report on McCarrick is being vetted right now. And I stopped when he said that. I've been chewing on that word because I've been wondering what it means for a report that the people of God, the lay faithful the lay Christian faithful are expecting to be a transparent report, giving them details about a spidering network of cover-up. What it means for it to be vetted, like who it is that's signing off on it and what it is that they're looking for to vet. So that idea that we would be vetting our disclosures, imagine making an examination of conscience, but then listing out your sins, but then right before you go into the confessional, you vet them, right, to make sure that you won't have to say anything too embarrassing or too troubling. There may well be things that he may have meant by vetting something inoffensive, but I have not yet figured out what it could be.
No,
It's
it's clear that whatever the McCarrick report looks like in the end, it's going to be redacted. This was said from the beginning in Rome that one of the reasons it was taking so long was that they needed to decide what they could make public. The last time the U.S. bishops met in November, they famously had a vote to encourage the Holy See to release only the information that it could
and that it
release.
considered to be appropriate, right? That it legally and morally and considered to be appropriate.
And one of the things that came out in the course of the floor discussion on that motion was that Rome had previously said they had to look at what they could actually make public.
In accord, I think they said, with canon law. Now,
yes.
the person the universal legislator of canon law actually lives in Rome, which is an incredible coincidence in this situation, and is able to dispense from any canonical prohibition that would prevent him from releasing any kind of information. He
showed a remarkable flexibility towards dispensing with canon law on other occasions when the mood takes it.
I have no comment on that, but certainly it was curious. It's curious to hear the people who make the rules, or the people who report to the guy who makes the rules saying, we have to see what we can do in accord with the rules. That would be like, me saying to my kids, well, I know you want to stay up late tonight, but my hands are absolutely tied. There's nothing I can do because bedtime's at 7:30. Well, I freaking set the bedtime, so I can let them stay up late if I want to. And if I do that, it's excuse making. I don't know that that's true in this case, but when I do that, it's excuse making.
So here's the thing. What could possibly be in the McCarrick report that could not be released for good reason, other than, for example, the testimony or names of his victims? And the church, for wise and prudent reasons, would not want to put them in the spotlight. So
matters subject to the seal. So things related to the victims, matters subject to the seal of confession. State
let's
secrets.
Be honest. State secrets, okay. But what's a state secret in the Vatican really going to reflect poorly on? It's not that Rome has nuclear launch codes that they're going to be worried about. They're worried about, for example, and I'm speculating here, McCarrick's involvement in the brokering of the deal with China, which is already subject to significant criticism.
And this is where I say the politicization, because I think there are people who are worried about McCarrick's involvement in the deal with China, and I think there are probably also people who are worried about McCarrick's involvement in 1989 in the mediation between Ostpolitik and John Paul II's decidedly different approach to Eastern Europe. There are things I know. You hear people say all the time, well, the conservatives don't want this because they don't want to taint the legacy of John Paul II, or the liberals don't want this because they don't want to taint the legacy of Pope Francis, and that's crap. I think that anybody who's thoughtful and is not worried about self-interest recognizes the value a transparent set of reporting now. And as a fan of both John Paul II and Pope Francis, I want clarity.
Well, it is crap, but it nevertheless is true. I mean, I've talked
Sure.
to people who've had sight of lots of McCarrick files. I don't know that anyone, apart from maybe Cardinal McCarrick, has seen them all yet, but certainly someone who's read through a lot of them. And the comment I got from him was, "You don't understand. This would reflect so terribly on St. John Paul II. It would completely tarnish his legacy." I think "crack his halo" was the phrase he would use. And again, this to me betrays a totally human and political understanding of every aspect of the church, one that we can't recover from scandal, because as if maladministration or anything else is somehow a determining characteristic of whether the church has authority, and of course it isn't. The second thing is to suggest that because John Paul II is a saint, somehow we couldn't possibly tolerate coming to know anything about his time as Pope, which would reflect poorly in his governance, when, frankly, the Legionaries of Christ has already provided
Right.
more than ample
Yeah,
demonstration.
and Sedano and various other things. And John Paul II, I think, is a saint. I think a great part of his sanctification was his suffering in his later years, when it is obvious that he, by virtue of his physical limitations and sufferings, was not governing the church in the way that he did at his spry young age of 59 when he started the job, right? I mean, so
Correct.
it's...
Correct. And so the other thing I would say about this is, we don't think that, at least I don't think, John Paul II is a saint because the church has made a determination of his life and governance of the church and declared it saintly. John Paul II is declared a saint because the church has, according to its own measures and metric and authority, received assurance that he is in heaven. That's the definition of a saint.
Yeah, and
it's
worthy
not to
of-
sanctify
right.
everything he did on earth. It's
Right,
just
exactly,
simply
and
say
that everything
the church
he
has been
did-
satisfied that he is in heaven.
Right, and that everything
that's
he
not gonna
did-
change.
Right, exactly, right. So yeah, the idea, it's clericalism, Ed. It's clericalism.
It is.
It's a kind of clericalism, and I love when I realize that something's clericalism, because I feel like I should send the Holy Father a note that says, "You're right."
I feel like I should send Cardinal Supich a cookie every time I say clericalism.
It's clericalism, Ed, because it says the people of God are not capable of understanding that someone that they admired also had deficiencies. Well, the people of God are in human relationships. They're aware of that fact. And it's the kind of clericalism that says that we who work in the Roman Curia can see these things about John Paul II, but we have to present a public image that's different than that. Well, the great grace of an integrated Christian life is not having to be one thing in one place and another thing in another place. And if we don't know that, if the people in the Holy See don't know that, then we've got a bigger problem than who did what with McCarrick. We've got a problem about fundamental questions about what it is to be a Christian. So
I think there are a lot of those fundamental questions that could profitably be asked about many of the people who work in the Roman Curia. Not all of them.
That's true. Not all of them. Not all. No.
Some of my
No,
best
that's-
friends are officials in the Roman Curia. I love them to pieces. They're
Right.
excellent priests.
Yeah,
they
right.
have a
Totally.
level of personal holiness, which
Totally.
I envy.
And they have a kind of martyrdom. All the guys who I know
Yeah.
who work in the Curia, and actually women too, all the people who I know who work in the Curia. I was talking to somebody who works in a diocesan chancery this week, and I spent most of my career in a diocesan chancery, and there's a kind of malaise that can grow over one's heart in service to a diocesan curia, and especially in the last year, those I know who work in diocesan curias are just down, and that, which I think is a sort of a hidden and living martyrdom of service to the church, that thing is magnified in the Roman Curia, where one has to deal, with the dark side of the gospel of light with regularity, and so there are many great people in the Roman Curia with great holiness and doing a hard thing. I don't know why I got on that, but it's true. With regard to
It's
McCarrick,
because people always say that I'm being snotty to everyone all the time. And I'm
no,
trying to
but
be-
people say that to me too. But listen, with regard to McCarrick,
we
and-
finally get a transition away from McCarrick.
and what we don't know, I just wanted to say this. It's interesting. We were talking about Bransfield. We know much more about Bransfield than we do about McCarrick, and we do because of the Washington Post. And so the other thing that I found really interesting, and all credit to the Washington Post and our competitors there. We are competitors with the Washington Post, and we want to scoop them every single day. But they got a great scoop, and good for them. We'll get the next one, but they got this one. Anyway, all credit to the Washington Post. The thing is, back in Baltimore, I was talking with Bishop Dealey, and he said, we know the metropolitan model works because look at the Lori Bransfield thing. And so I asked him both during the press conference and after. Right, 4 cases it worked, and we're going to focus on this one. But I asked him both in the press conference and then after, Bishop, by
what metric of success did this work?
Right. The names of the people who got the gifts came out, and that would have just been, that would have not been manifested to anyone. That would not have been corrected had it not been for the Washington Post, not like the Washington Post reading the report that was officially provided to them and asking questions about what seemed to be missing, but the Washington Post getting the report through back channels and sources and leakers and whistleblowers. It doesn't work if it takes people violating their obligations to or giving something surreptitiously to a journalist who notices a problem with it and calls it to public attention. And I honestly, I think Archbishop Laurie is one of the good ones. I think he's made many, many, many good choices, and I believe him when he says that this was made in good faith. The point of involvement of other people, the point of lay expertise and involvement is that people can make mistakes in good faith, and that's why you have lots of eyes asking probing questions on these kinds of things, because we all make assumptions that are flawed sometimes, or we all have blind spots sometimes, or whatever, and so that's why we have people involved. But the idea that it worked when it took the Post and whistleblowers and leakers, just I don't know what working is. And still, we know more about Bransfield than we do about McCarrick.
Yeah, and that's because we're waiting to see who else is going to leak about McCarrick. And there's now a lot of files on two sides of the ocean, and I'm sure that there will continue to be leaks about McCarrick. I hope they come to us before the Washington Post, but there will be more that will come out. And let's be clear, when they do, it will be another round of scandals all over again, and that's unfortunate and totally avoidable.
Yes. Dear listeners,
can be avoided
right now it is not being avoided. Right now it is taking the media to make these things happen. Dear listeners, you know us and trust us, and you know and trust our work. And if you think that there are things that are not being handled rightly, you know how to contact us. But we believe that bringing things to light is the best means of purification for the church, and we believe that you can be helpful for us in that, dear listeners. So you know where to find us. Anywho, what should we talk about? You want to talk about Indiana?
Sure.
You want to talk about Indiana or Peace Cross?
We could talk about either. I think there's probably more to talk about with Indiana.
There is more to talk about. We're going to talk about Indiana and Brebeuf Preparatory High School in Indianapolis. But before we do that, Ed, you have been very keen to talk about the Supreme Court's decision about the Peace Cross. And I don't think we need to do a whole thing about it, but I think, Ed, that I'm going to put 90 seconds on the clock, and I have nothing to say about this. So it's just Ed's 90 seconds.
I'm woefully unprepared for this sort of monologuing. Hang up. I want to get my
Should I start
notes.
the clock?
Okay. So the thing about the Peace Cross decision, which is actually more properly entitled the Maryland Humanist Association versus the Maryland Park Service. Forgive me, I don't have, because you're catching me by surprise, I don't have the full formal name of the case in front of me. But basically what it is this enormous World War I memorial cross, which is in the middle of a roundabout in Bladensburg, Maryland, and which I drive past every day on my way to work, has been under several suits for the last several years. They wanted to pull it down because it's cross-shaped, and therefore because it's on public land and is maintained at public expense, it was considered to be a First Amendment violation. Now, the Supreme Court has said no, and they basically knocked chunks out of the famous Lemon test, which is the previous jurisprudential test that the Supreme Court would apply in cases to decide whether or not the government had become excessively entangled, either in a religious activity or in a religious expression. And they really, really did just give it a good kicking and said that in this case, there should be a presumption of constitutionality for longstanding monuments, symbols, and practice. And to me, really reading the full decision, it looked like they were saying, we're not going to have open season on our cultural heritage, that this is a country with a long tradition of religious symbolism in our public life because there's a long tradition of religious adherence amongst the people, and that we are a democracy. Yes, we are a secular democracy. Yes, we are a non-confessional state. Absolutely. But we are also, first and foremost, we the people. And we are not going to whitewash where we've come from or who we are through the lens of a modern secularist religion in its own right. Justice Alito, who wrote the majority opinion, said in the decision that a government that roams the land tearing down monuments with religious symbolism and scrubbing away any reference to the divine will strike many people as aggressively hostile to religion. And I think that's true. I'm just really pleased, not just that this thing that I've been looking at every day on my way into work isn't going to be torn down, which would have been gut-wrenching, but also that this is really hopefully the end of open season on religious symbolism in our public life, which is there not because the state is slyly trying to be Christian, but just because this is how this country has been for several hundred years, and we're not going to pretend that we didn't come from where we came from.
Well said. Well said. Ed's, we call that's a little segment that I like to call Ed's 90 Seconds on the Peace Cross. And obviously, it's a segment
Can I
that
have a little more notice next time?
Dude, I think you nailed it. Well, listeners, if you think Ed nailed it, you let us know. We're going to talk now about the Archdiocese of Indianapolis and Braybrook Preparatory High School in Indianapolis. So this is a story. We're recording this on Thursday, June 20th, which I've said already. It'll probably come out tomorrow, Friday, June 21st. But this is a story that just really broke this afternoon. The Archdiocese of Indianapolis announced today that a local Jesuit high school will no longer be recognized as a Catholic school. And the reason is because in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, every archdiocesan Catholic high school and private Catholic high school is required to state in its contracts and in its job descriptions with teachers and other administrators that teachers and administrators are categorized as ministers of the gospel. And what that means is that they are responsible for forming students in accord with the gospel and communicating the gospel and Catholic teaching inside and outside the classroom. And so the Archdiocese of Indianapolis says teachers have to commit to living in accord with the teachings of the church and not to, even in their private lives outside of school, take public actions, manifestly public actions that are contrary to the teachings of the church. Braybrook Catholic High School doesn't like this, and they said that they're not going to hold their teachers to these kinds of ministerial teaching contract agreements. And so the Archdiocese of Indianapolis says that they are no longer a Catholic school. Now, the backstory is that in 2017, a teacher was a teacher at the school contracted a same-sex legally recognized marriage. Or the school became aware of it in 2017 that a teacher had contracted a legally recognized same-sex marriage, and the Archdiocese said that public stance, that public juridic act, an act of the public record, is not consistent with the teachings of the church, and should the teacher therefore should withdraw from that situation, or the contract should not be renewed. And the high school declined to do that, and they have been in a conversation, I suppose, about that since then. And the conversation has reached this point where the Archdiocese says that Braybrook Jesuit Presbyterian High School is not a Catholic school. Now, here's what's interesting. The school leaders, the principal and president of the school, have essentially said, we don't accept as valid the archdiocesan designation that we're not a Catholic school. Our identity as a Catholic Jesuit institution remains unchanged, the Archdiocese said. They said that they will appeal this decision by the Archdiocese, and that they will that they do not accept the Archbishop's decision, that he has unjustly interfered into their governance of their Jesuit school. So this is an interesting situation, Ed, for us, because there are all kinds of canonical questions here about Book 3 of the Code, which we don't talk about as often as we would like, at least the sections on schools in Book 3 of the Code, that the bishop does have the right to establish norms for schools, and that he has a right to disallow or unpermit, I don't know what the right word is, an institution which is in fact Catholic, because it's an apostolate of a Catholic religious institute, from presenting itself as a Catholic school. And he's rung that bell. The Archbishop of Indianapolis has rung that bell. And so the Jesuits say that they'll appeal, and they said that they'll appeal first to the Archbishop and then to the Congregation for Education, which essentially they're well, they said to the Holy See, but I presume that's where they would go. Where do you think they'd go?
I would assume they go to the Congregation for Clergy, which handles appeals of episcopal acts of administration.
Okay, bingo. So they'll go to the Congregation for Clergy, my mistake.
At least under Pastor Bonus, which is still in force this week.
Yeah, it's still in force this week until the new one comes up. Okay, so thank you, Ed, for your knowledge of procedural law. So the way that hierarchical recourse works in the church is that you have a certain period of time to ask the person who's made a decision to withdraw, to take that decision back, and if they don't do that, then you can appeal to a higher authority, in this case, the Congregation for Clergy. So that's what they've said they'll do. So they've given us a little hint that we're going to have like an administrative hierarchical recourse fight, which, we're probably all excited about because we took a class in it, we've done a few and all of that. But really, apart from the sort of wonky canonical stuff, the real stuff is they are at this, they're in this fight not only, I think, about sexual orientation and what teachers are, but what a Catholic school is and how it relates to the hierarchical constitution of the church. The idea of not accepting as valid the determination of the diocesan bishop is striking to me. I mean, that's a big deal.
Are we going to say the S word?
What is the S word?
The S word when you reject the legitimate authority of your local ordinary?
What Ed is asking
I'm
me-
asking. I'm asking. I don't have an opinion on this yet.
The question that Ed is asking. So there is a word, the S word, that we use in the church to refer to the refusal of submission. I think the crime of schism, which is the word that we're talking about, is the refusal of submission. I think the way the canon is worded to the Roman.
It's breaking communion.
Yeah, but the crime. I'm just talking about the crime of schism itself.
I see.
Yeah. So I'm just pulling it up because I think the crime of schism. Schism is the withdrawal of submission to the supreme pontiff or from communion with the members of the church subject to him. So I think there's probably a question here about whether this is a withdrawal from communion with the diocesan bishop by rejecting his authority. It's a really interesting question.
I feel like there was a similar case, and you will probably remember this much better than I do because of your years in chancery practice in this country, where in St. Louis,
my Slaven years. Yes, in St. Louis, yes. Mm-hmm.
Where a parish, if I'm not mistaken, rejected the authority of the local bishop.
They sure did.
Terrible things happened to them.
Yes. So this situation at St. Stanislaus Church, which I think was just outside of St. Louis, I don't exactly remember, but I want to say it was in suburban St. Louis, but it doesn't.
But in the Archdiocese of
in the Archdiocese of St. Louis, got in a conflict with. Essentially with a series of archbishops, and it's a fascinating conflict. But in the 80s, the parish had a lay board of directors, which is an old-fashioned way that parishes used to be organized that the Vatican rejected. They call it something called lay trusteeism, and they say that you can't be structured that way. And they had gotten in disagreements with their bishops about that. The archbishop had mandated that the parish be structured appropriately, that the pastor be the civilly recognized administrator of the parish, and this back and forth went all the way to the Holy See, and it really came to a head, though. This dispute about who was in charge of the parish came to a head because in the early 2000s, the Archbishop of Chicago, I think it was already Archbishop Burke by that time. Excuse me, the Archbishop of St. Louis, thank you, who I think was, I couldn't, this started with Regali, but I think by then it was Burke, removed the priests in the parish and assigned someone else, and the people wouldn't take him. They went and got their own priest. And This
was deemed a violation of communion.
Right, exactly. This led to penalties of interdict, and the board members were excommunicated. After escalating penalties, the board members were excommunicated, which was a decision that was upheld by the Holy See. So I think,
and they were excommunicated, if I'm not mistaken, which is why I raised this case. Is I think the justification of excommunication was schism.
Yeah, I just actually checked because what I thought it was, and canon lawyers who are listening, is that he issued like an escalating series of penal precepts and with the penalty of schism. But no, it was with the penalty of excommunication attached to one along the way. But it wasn't an escalating series of penal precepts. It was the declaration of a penalty for schism, and the CDF upheld that. So there is this. This has happened, and the priest who they went and got, who they sort of hired on their own, was eventually laicized even. So this is a big deal, and this is a particularly big deal because this is not the lay board of a parish in St. Louis. This is a province. This is a religious province. So it's the fight is about this issue of the moral behavior of Catholic school teachers, but the terms of the fight are striking.
The fight is about the moral behavior of Catholic school teachers, but it's also about the control, the rightful control of the local bishop over how the faith is taught and how the faith is represented institutionally in the territory of the diocese. And neither the Jesuits nor any other order, while maintaining their own sort of reporting mechanisms within the order, have the right or the authority to tell the local bishop, we will decide what is Catholic
What
and
is Catholic?
not.
What isn't? Yeah. And
Because
I think
that doesn't exist in the hierarchy of the church. The hierarchy
because
of the church is the
right.
bishops.
Because we're a hierarchical church, exactly. So I think they would say, look, the code gives you the permission to establish standards to hire and fire teachers of religion, but they would say your authority, you're kind of overreaching on your authority because you're saying essentially that every teacher is a teacher of religion. But what I think they miss is that the code expressly mentions the diocesan bishop's prerogative to establish general decrees, essentially particular law for Catholic schools. And the Archdiocese of St. Louis where are we? Yeah, the Archdiocese of Indianapolis has done that. The Archdiocese of Indianapolis has said in our schools, we consider teachers to be ministers of the gospel, and therefore the contracts have to establish that they have to live a life in keeping with the teachings of the church. And so that's the bishop exercising his legislative authority, and the province, the Jesuit province, essentially saying either we don't recognize that legislative authority, we think that that's an invalid act, but then we also don't recognize, your authority to exercise your right to designate or not designate a Catholic institution as a Catholic school. So if they had simply, it's interesting because if they had simply not recognized, or if they'd simply thought the law was invalid, that his decree went too far, was somehow contra legem, they might have appealed the law. But what they're appealing is not the particular law of the diocese, but this designation that the school is not Catholic, which is a more, I think, direct and immediate repudiation of the bishop's sort of governance authority.
And not recognized in particular law, recognized in the universal law of the church.
Right, exactly. They're not saying the particular law is contrary. Thank you. They're not saying the particular law is contrary to the universal law. They're saying the bishop exercised a prerogative given to him in universal law, and we don't accept it. And that's
schism. That is schism. Well, let me say that I can't say it's schism because I don't know all the facts of the case. But what I will tell you is this: on the strength of the facts that we know today, when this thing hits the desk of an official at the Congregation for Clergy, they're going to send it right across the road to the CDF with a little red bow that says schism.
Schism. I think that's probably right. And I don't know if the Jesuit province recognizes that. I think that.
I think the Jesuit provinces, like many Jesuit provinces, has often had trouble recognizing episcopal authority.
I am trying to be, as I am obliged to be on this show, the guy who reserves judgment until all the facts are in, and we don't have all of the facts in this situation.
I just said that. I'm not rushing to judgment. I'm simply saying the facts of the case as currently laid out point to a very clear point of law.
This is a fascinating legal situation because what you have here is not something that you have every day. You have an old-fashioned refusal of communion with the diocesan bishop on the part of a juridic institution, not even a juridic person of like the parish, but a province. I mean, this is a big deal.
It is a big deal. Can I just preempt to make a prediction about how this will be resolved? Because nobody wants to see this go the way I think it probably would in a full hierarchical recourse.
See, I don't know that nobody wants to see it. I honestly wonder.
I want to see it.
No, I mean we want to see it, but I honestly wonder if there is an intention to make I don't think they want to make a compromise. And I have made, in my diocesan ministry, I have sat down with plenty of people who are in a situation at odds with the bishop and say, how can we work this out so that it doesn't become a thing? But I can't help but wonder if there's some desire for this to become a thing in order to make some principled stand, because this issue about the Christian life of Catholic school teachers is an issue that some Jesuits, prominent Jesuits, have been really raising and pillorying of late and for quite some time. Ed, how do you think it's going to be resolved?
I agree with you, and that's the one thing the Jesuit school got right in its sort of public missive saying, to hell with you, Bishop, we'll do what we like, we've decided what's Catholic here, is that they said that they consider this to be a test case, that they consider this to be precedent setting, and it absolutely is, and it absolutely will set a precedent. Now, normally when cases like this come up in Rome, and it admittedly usually happens more when the law is perhaps not so much on the side of the bishop, but just generally, there is a preference in Rome for these things to be settled out of court, so to speak. And I would say that the Jesuit provincial superior is going to be getting a phone call in the not too distant future asking him if he is fully aware of exactly what is going on here and exactly what this means, and inviting him to perhaps reconsider and find a different way forward. Whether they will or not is a different thing, but they're playing with live ammo here.
No, yeah, I think that's right. Yes, I think that they're going to be encouraged at every level. But the very fact that this happened, what this tells me that this happened, that the bishop actually it was the school that issued the statement first and said, we think the bishop's going to be releasing a statement tomorrow and we reject it, et cetera. And then the diocese released their statement like a little bit after. But the very fact that this happened means that
rejecting the Bishop's Act before the fact is kind of a... But I don't want to keep saying the S word, man, but...
It's an indication that there has been a lot going on already between the archbishop and the provincial. And, it's often the case in diocesan ministry. I can say in my time as a diocesan chancellor and other things, it's often the case to sit with a provincial about things that have come up with a religious institute and say, how are we going to work through this? And sometimes it's like, well, for the good of everybody, the provincial's sort of going to pull this guy who just is at odds with the bishop for some reason and find him a better fit or whatever. But the fact that they got to this point means that a lot of talking has already happened, and that talking broke down in a major way. And obviously, that's where I wonder if whether the provincial sort of the idea that that they say we are still a Catholic school, whatever the archdiocese says, that's where I wonder if they might. I mean, the question that they have to decide now is: was that something that happened in the heat of the moment, and they're going to sort of back down and say, well, we're appealing this, but ultimately we know that bishops are bishops, or if they're going to dig in on something that essentially says we reject the authority of the diocesan bishop.
It should be noted that there are some religious orders that operate schools in this country, and they go to great lengths to not describe themselves as a Catholic schools because of this point, which is they don't necessarily want to be under the oversight of the local bishop. They don't want to have that fight. They want to say, look, we want to teach the faith here according to our own lights and with the faculty that we choose, but we're not going to hold ourselves out as a Catholic school.
Now, incidentally, although they do that in order to sort of not be at odds with the bishop, they still are a Catholic institution. Whether they hold themselves out as a Catholic school, they're still governed. A university is still governed by ex corde ecclesia. This school, which can no longer call itself Catholic, is still governed by the Congregation for Catholic Education and the diocesan bishop. It's still an apostolate of the Jesuits. Now, they could, I suppose, invalidly alienate everything, that doesn't belong to the Jesuits, if this is, and sort of make this not an apostolate of the.
Didn't they try to do that at Georgetown?
Yeah. Yeah, it didn't work out. So anyway. Okay. We are going to be watching this, you guys, because it's about a lot. It's about the question, which I think is a very clear question, which is that Catholic school teachers be held accountable to living in accord with the teachings of the Church. Now, one other point that people have been asking: why is this different from a Catholic who is divorced and remarried? And here are a couple of answers. In the first point, I don't think it is. Fundamentally, it's a yes with it's a yes with an if or a no with a but situation, right? I mean, fundamentally, a cohabiting couple who are divorced and remarried are not living in accord with the teachings of the Church, and the differences are, and that has to be grappled with, and that's a reality. The differences are that a same-sex marriage is always. A marriage is always a public act, and a same-sex marriage is always a public act that is manifestly contrary to the teachings of the Church. There's no way to look at a same-sex marriage and say, maybe that's a valid union or not, I don't know. A situation which may well be a valid marriage, which is not known, which is not a source of scandal, which is not causing scandal, is different. Now, if two people who are not married are cohabiting, whether there's a divorce involved or not, if a man is living with his obvious mistress and estranged from his wife, that's an issue of scandal too. And I think a diocesan bishop should these same norms would preclude a person in that situation from being a teacher too. Well, the other difference is that it can be rectified.
Well, so there's that; it can be rectified. But the other thing is, let's not let's not accept straw men here for knocking down. There have been examples of Catholic school teachers in this
That
country
have,
who have been dismissed for living in irregular unions, who have been dismissed for becoming pregnant or getting someone else
actually
pregnant
that is
outside
actually
of
probably
marriage.
that's probably an unjust one, but it's still in some ways
But
it's still the
I'm saying,
prerogative of the
nevertheless,
school to make a
there's
decision. Right,
often this straw man setup that says, "Oh, well, the church only ever does this with homosexual
Which is not
faculty."
true.
That is just not true. It's
Right.
not true at all.
It's not
In
true at
fact,
all.
It's not even close to being a majority.
But I think there are essential differences, or there are sort of qualitative differences between this and that.
Well, there's a natural law witness at play as well.
Right, because of the fact that this is always an obvious and clear repudiation of Catholic teaching. Now,
And the natural law.
Right, and the natural law. And when anyone is living in a repudiation of Catholic teaching or the natural law, who is a minister of the church in some way or not, the church should and does hold them to account. But I think it's important to understand, people who are cohabiting, if there's no divorce involved, I mean, they can rectify it. It may not be known, but let's say it's known and it's a source of scandal. They can rectify it by getting married, or they can rectify it by separating. And I suspect this teacher had the option of separating as well. But to just say, well, this is just like it's apples and apples, or well, what about other sinners? What about people who don't recycle? There is a difference too between an incidence of sin and a perduring state of objective immorality. So the person who gets pregnant, who's not cohabiting but gets pregnant, obviously their belly demonstrates that they committed a sin. The person who is bigamous, who's living with 2 or 3 wives at a time, has set himself, or living with a same-sex partner, has set himself in a perduring state of opposition to the teachings of the church. It's not an incidental thing, but an ongoing thing.
That's right.
So that's the answer there for those of you who are wondering about that. Okie dokie. So that is something to watch. Ed and I had a few other things that we wanted to talk about, but I am afraid, dear friend, that we are going to have to call it a day or get close to calling it a day, which means that the next thing we wanted to talk about, the Amazon Synod document, we will have to talk about next week. Actually, I will be on vacation next week in the Yucatan, which is close to the Amazon. So I'll see if I can get the lay of the land down there, and then we'll have to talk about this in future. You'll have to talk about it with Carl next week. But Ed, anything else you want to do before we wrap up?
We could play a game.
Sure, let's play a game.
JD, a couple of weeks ago, I played a little game with Carl, who we all love.
We do. Carl is not on our podcast this week because he is helping his in-laws move, which is really just a Carl thing to do. It's a kindness. It's a real mitzvah.
A Carl kindness. So, Carl's not here, but we played a little game called Yes or No, in
Yes,
which we asked Carl to simply respond yes or no to a list of 15 things, because Carl very rarely gives any answer other than yes or no.
Right.
You, on the other hand, I think it'd be fair to say, feel somewhat constricted by...
See, I don't like this. Are you saying that, am I wishy-washy? Is that what you're saying by this, that I'm wishy-washy?
No, not wishy-washy. I didn't say that. I'm just saying that you often find it hard to confine yourself to a simple yes or no answer.
Well,
and
life is complex, my friend.
It is, but sometimes you just have to be willing to put your chips on the table and say...
Okay.
So... I
have deigned to permit Ed to play this game with me, which is called, I don't know.
Well, no, but are you willing to play for high stakes is the real question here.
What are the stakes?
Well, so Carl, I never had any doubt that he could just say yes or no. I have my suspicions that you might find this hard.
I don't know if you guys can believe the insubordination that's going on here.
This is all voluntary. I'm just curious. Do you want to do a 3 strikes policy?
What happens after 3 strikes?
You have to sing a hymn of my choosing a cappella.
Let's just play the game, Ed.
Okay.
Oh, wait, hold on. I know how to answer that. Ask me again.
What's the question?
Do I want to sing a hymn of your choosing?
Do you want to sing a hymn of my choosing?
No. No.
All right.
I will let my yes be yes and my no be no.
All right, great.
Either hot or cold. I do not wish to be spit from the mouth of the Lord.
You see, you couldn't just keep it to yes or no.
Okay, I get it. Tell me.
All right. Jonah, cue dramatic music. JD, bishops' conferences, yes or no?
Yes. Because...
You see?
Because they're established. They're called for and established by the Second Vatican Council.
No, I don't care. No one cares. We just want to know
no
yes
one
or no.
cares what Christus Dominus says?
No one cares what your rationale is. We own the
Okay.
beauty of the game is you don't give reasons. It's
Yes.
just yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. Commentary articles on the website.
I mean, yes.
Wow,
Commentary.
this is-
It's
Oh
either
my
commentary
God,
or an
I
article.
can't believe
It's
you
either
know.
commentary or an article. I reject the premise of the question.
This is wow. This could hurt you more than I thought. I thought this would be fun. Let's try an easy one.
Did you say Chinese New Year? Yes.
I didn't say Chinese New Year. So let's
sorry,
try
I don't
another
know.
one. Let's
Oh,
try an
sorry.
easier one.
Okay, let's try an easier one. Chinese New Year. Yes.
No, that's not one of the ones that
Okay.
I was getting. Sand.
Yes.
Okay. See, that didn't hurt.
No.
Yoga.
No.
Holding hands during the Our Father at Mass.
No.
Ah, now you're getting into the spirit of it. Sentences that end with prepositions.
No.
Ad orientem.
Yes.
Walt Disney.
No.
Jordan Peterson.
No.
The Metropolitan Model.
No, man, I ain't about it.
Chicago-style pizza.
No.
Ordinary time.
Yes.
Liberal democracy.
Nah, man.
More cowbell.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I don't actually have it on me.
Hey, that was a great game, Ed.
That was
but
excruciating.
Listen, one good game deserves another. So we are going to play. We are going to play game, Ed.
We're going to play another game?
We're going to play another game, and I hope you're going to like it. This game, Ed, is going to be called Say Something Nice. So you have this in you, but the key is, Ed, to say something nice, and this is the tricky part, and to mean it. So I don't know. How
Am
do you
I
feel?
bound to the same sort of rigorous say something nice answers as you were bound to yes or no?
Yeah. So you're going to say something. You're going to say something nice about things that are worth saying something nice about.
Okay.
You're not
I'll
having
take
to
a swing at
endorse
it.
them wholesale, but you're going to say something nice about things. Okay.
Okay, I can do that.
Theresa May. Thanks, everybody.
No,
You've been
I can
listening
do.
to.
No, I can do this. I can do this.
Say something nice ends when it takes you more than 10 seconds to have something
Okay.
nice.
Theresa May has been refreshingly free of personal scandal.
The European Union.
Has a very pretty flag modeled on the crown of Our Lady of Strasbourg.
Great. The extreme far right and far left of Catholic media.
Do an excellent job of driving traffic to our website and showing us to be the credible and sober servants of the truth in the church that we are.
All right. Nuns on the bus.
They are using mass transportation and therefore helping to cut down on traffic on the interstate system.
Okay, and our final say something nice. I'm really enjoying this segment. I think
This is proving a lot harder than I thought it was.
I think say something nice is fun, and you're doing okay. The Chicago White Sox. Well, Ed, thanks for playing. You've been listening to CNA Newsroom. This has been a bonus episode, and thanks for spending time with us. I'm your host and CNA Editor-in-Chief, J.D. Flynn. From D.C. is Ed, the I Hate the White Sox Condon. Come on, Ed, you got anything for the White Sox?
They're not the Mets.
They're not the Mets. What about the shorts? What did you think about the White Sox? Or was that the Astros who had the shorts?
I think it was the Astros who had the shorts.
Yeah.
The White Sox, a lot of Cubs fans in Chicago can't stand the White Sox. It's the worst thing in the world for them. I was raised by a Cubs fan. My grandfather was a Cubs fan. His father actually pitched for the White Sox, and yet my grandfather was a Cubs fan. But the White Sox never really figured. It was the Mets. We hated the Mets.
There you
Still
go.
do.
Meet the Mets. CNA Newsroom is a production of Catholic News Agency, a service of EWTN News. Our producer this week is Joan McKeown. Kate Vike is on vacation. And special thanks, Ed, to you for hanging out.
This was a different one. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll be back next week. Not me. Adios.